Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. 3 books draw from Native American themes as a starting point for stories that will make you want to sleep with the lights on. Daniel Wilson's Hole in the Sky is a modern-day first contact story set on the Cherokee Nation. Nick Medina's new horror novel, The Whistler, explores consequences of ignoring the taboo of whistling at night. And Stephen Graham Jones' Blackfeet vampire wreaks vengeance in his latest work, The Buffalo Hunter Hunter. We'll hear from these authors after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. The city and borough of Wrangell in southeast Alaska is pausing work at a housing project after archaeologists confirmed artifacts at the site. KSTK's Colette Zarnicki has more.
While excavating a subdivision development site on Wrangell Island, construction crews uncovered a shell midden. Middens are ancient sites made up of shells and other remains. They help tell the story of who lived there and how they lived. The borough government owns the property and is pausing work near the midden until a state-approved mitigation plan is complete. Wrangell Borough Manager Mason Villarma says development will continue carefully.
It's been a 30-year pursuit in some cases. We are into a $4 million investment. And this is an opportunity for 20 housing lots, but being cognizant of any culturally significant artifacts is top of mind.
Currently, the Office of History and Archaeology and the State Historic Preservation Office are working on a treatment plan for recovery of the site that will involve further investigation and excavation. The property has a complicated history. It was once the site of the Wrangell Institute, an Alaska Native boarding school known for punishing students for speaking their language and other abuses. Albert Reinhardt, the administrator for the local tribal government, Wrangell Cooperative Association, says the site carries deep meaning.
There's a long history of colonialization that includes the Wrangell Institute, what we prefer now to call the Alaska Native Boarding School. A lot of families got separated in that time, and even my own family, there was a lot of trauma.
In August, excavators found remnants of the old boarding school, a footbridge, concrete, and utility lines. Construction was paused until the State Historic Office determined last month that the infrastructure would not be on the National Register of Historic Places. The 134-acre Aldertop Village site will eventually include 20 home lots. The public land sale auction is continuing and closes on December 1st. In Wrangell, I'm Colette Zarnicki.
A new bull riding champ was recently crowned at the Indian National Finals Rodeo in Las Vegas. As KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrazio reports, he now has an automatic chance to go pro with the PBR, Professional Bull Riders, unlike other tribal athletes before him.
Cole Brewer has it won by 1 point. He's got a gold buckle to take home, but he is not here to take it by default.
His victory qualified the Cheyenne River Sioux from South Dakota to try out at the New York Mavericks training camp. It's a change the PBR made last year.
Our relationship with the INFR is really opening up a lot of doors for these kids.
Chris Pantani is the team's GM.
It's given that extra shot, but those 5 days of competition are daunting. It's grueling. 5 big bowls to the championship.
Past INFR champs have a presence in the PBR today. Window Rock's Cody Jesus won it in 2016.
It's a straight path to where you want to go.
And in 2023, fellow Arizona Navajo Jacoy Hale from Ganado grabbed gold. He's happy Brewers getting a shot in the PBR.
It's a good opportunity. Wish I had that when I won it.
The Mavericks are also looking to bring back last year's champ, Tegan Gray, who is also Cheyenne River Sioux from South Dakota.
If Tegan accepts, you'll have the reigning champion coming down. You're going to have the past champion coming down, fighting for a spot on the team.
For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrazio.
And I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by AARP, whose Family Caregiver Resource Guide is available to caregivers by calling 877-333-5885 or at aarp.org/caregiver resources.
Support by Sonosky Chambers Law, championing tribal sovereignty and Native American rights since 1976. From opioids litigation to treaty rights to tribal self-governance. With offices in Washington, D.C., New Mexico, California, and Alaska. Sonosky Chambers Law.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Henry is an aspiring ghost hunter on the cusp of social media fame. If you're familiar with some Native American taboos, you know the trouble a person might encounter by whistling at night. And that's just what happens to Henry in a new novel, The Whistler, by Nick Medina. Cherokee author Daniel H. Wilson imagines another kind of scary situation when aliens make contact above a man's yard in the middle of the Cherokee Nation. In his new thriller, Hole in the Sky. We'll hear from both Nick and Daniel today. We'll also hear from best-selling horror master Stephen Graham Jones. His book, The Buffalo Hunter Hunter, slices open real horrors of the late 1800s Indian Wars through the eyes of a tortured monster that takes out his vengeance on soldiers responsible for the massacre and the extermination of the buffalo. These are a few new horror novels written by Indigenous authors that are on our native bookshelf for this spooky season. You can join our conversation today by calling 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from Chicago is Nick Medina. He is an author and a member of the Tunica Biloxi Indian tribe. Nick, hello, and welcome to Native America Calling.
Good morning, Sean. It's good to be with you.
It's great to have you. Joining us from Portland, Oregon is Daniel H. Wilson. He is an author, a screenwriter, and a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. Daniel, good morning and welcome to the show to you as well.
Hey, Sean. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Nick, I want to begin with you and the Whistler. Of course, many tribes have taboos and teachings about whistling at night. What led you to focus on that cultural element in this new book?
I think it was kind of just in my head because I had been in an anthology that consists of stories written by Native and Indigenous authors called Never Whistle at Night. And that came out a couple of years ago. So that was right around the time when I started working on this book. So I think that was just something that was stuck in my head, and as I was working on this book and I saw connections to other things that lent itself to that superstition, I just kind of ran with it, and the Whistler was born.
Now, readers will recognize some of these characters from your previous book, Indian Burial Ground. Tell us more about how this story and those characters connect to that previous book.
Yeah, Indian Burial Ground and The Whistler are basically kind of companion novels, though they do stand on their own. They have their own main characters, so you don't have to necessarily read both of them if you didn't want to. But in Indian Burial Ground, I had left a question unanswered, and it was kind of a big question that I wanted to leave it just open-ended for the reader to figure out on their own or to come to their own conclusion. But then my editor had asked me, do you have an answer for this question? And at the time, I didn't have an answer. And again, that was just kind of one of those things that I think settled in the back of my brain, and eventually an answer came forth. And once it did, it took hold, and I knew that there was a story there, and I just kind of ran with it.
Now, we hear sometimes from authors about how their characters, even minor or background characters, take on a life of their own. How do these characters exist to you, Nick?
I kind of think of them as friends in a sense, because when you are writing and you're carrying around these stories for so long, they become very much a part of your life. And I'm always thinking about them and thinking about what they're doing and, where they might be going or where they're headed on this reservation that I've created. And that's been one of the really fun things about putting together these books. I'm able to revisit characters and bring them back in different ways and at different times in their lives. For instance, there's a character in my first book, Sisters of the Lost Nation, who's only 13 in that book. But then in Indian Burial Ground, she takes a much bigger role, and she's 40 years old at that time. And then we get to see her again in The Whistler. So it's a lot of fun to follow these characters and to continue, continue just kind of advancing them in their own world and with their own thoughts and values, and seeing what happens to them basically as they age.
Let's talk about the main character in The Whistler, Henry. And a big part of the story is he gets injured and becomes quadriplegic. And we read about him struggling and the emotional toll that injury takes on him. And it's part of the horror plot, but it's also a story about a person who just has to come to terms with a new reality, a tragedy. Why did you want to explore paralysis in this way?
Paralysis and the loss of function, the loss of autonomy is something that really frightens me. More than monsters or ghosts, I'm always more frightened by the things that can happen in life and the things that do happen in life, and especially what people do to other people. And for some reason, I just started thinking about paralysis and living with, quadriplegia or paraplegia. And I actually had met a friend a few years ago, and we've become closer over the last few years. And he lives with quadriplegia, and I'd see all the things that he'd go through and all of the challenges he'd have. And he's not looking for pity, of course, but I can't help but look at him and think that's just a really tough way to live. And what happened to him is such an unfortunate thing. And without him, though, I wouldn't have attempted this character, but I wanted to try to represent someone living with paralysis in as authentic of a way as possible. And the friend I'm referring to, Peter, allowed me to ask him any question I had, no matter how personal it might have been. He had no limits when it came to the questions that I wanted to ask him. And we actually got to sit down several times as I was writing this book. And he gave me so much great information, all of the highs, the lows, the challenges, the heartbreak. He really helped me see what it's like to suffer an injury that basically changes your own entire life. And Peter was only 20 years old when this happened to him. He was on a road trip with his friends in college, and he was driving at night, and he fell asleep at the wheel. And the SUV that he was driving rolled over and ended up crushing the back of his neck. And he was only 20 at the time. Now he's about 35, so he's been living with this for a good amount of time. So he was able to walk me through that process of what it's like to suffer from the grief and the loss, and to try to come to grips with it and to make a new plan for your life. And obviously that's a really, really tough thing.
Now, I understand that you did write this book with paralysis in mind in terms of readers who might have experienced that themselves. What have you heard from them in terms of their feedback? Did they feel that you did an accurate representation or portrayal of somebody who might be in that situation?
I haven't gotten a lot of feedback from people living with paralysis, but Peter was and continues to be a great source and resource for this book. And he actually acted as a sensitivity reader for me. So he read the book in advance of publication, and he made sure that I had represented things as accurately as possible. And I should say that, when someone experiences quadriplegia or paralysis in general, it's going to be different for each person because it's such a unpredictable and very unique thing. Each injury can lead to different disabilities and leave you with different abilities. So I was basing Henry off of Peter's experience, and Peter basically put his stamp of approval on everything before we went to publication with this. So I'm happy that at least from his point of view, this is an accurate character.
Mm-hmm. Now, the characters in The Whistler, they are members of the Dakota tribe. This is a fictional tribe in Louisiana. Tell us more about who these people are in their community.
Yeah, the Dakota are kind of loosely based on my own tribe that I'm a member of, the Tunica Biloxi tribe, which is located in central Louisiana. And the Dakota tribe is a smaller tribe, at least in my mind. That's how I think of them, much like the Tunica Biloxi tribe. And I wanted to, model them after the Tunica Biloxi because I think the setting of Louisiana is such a unique setting for native stories. A lot of the books that I read about natives typically take place more like in the plains or, other areas that, especially like the Southwest, other areas other than Louisiana. So this location allowed me to explore different things because I feel like in Louisiana, there's a lot of kind of spookier things that go on and everything with the bayous and the alligators and the swamps and all that stuff just kind of lent itself to a very kind of contained tribe. They have their old stories, and there's a character in the book named Miss Shelby who was the last of the legend keepers for the tribe, and so she's become a really big character throughout my books because she's the one who provides the traditional tales and the old ways of life, which the tribe is kind of trying to cling to. There are moments throughout the books where I talk about how a lot of past tends to get lost, especially in a modern world with modern problems. It's very easy to overlook the old stories and the old ways of life. And so over the course of the books that I've written, we kind of see stories coming back to life and pertinent in today's world.
All right, Nick Medina kicking off our conversation here today on Native America Calling, his latest book, The Whistler. We are talking about it today. Some superstitions shouldn't be ignored. That's listed on the cover. And Nick is also the author of Indian Burial Ground, and some of the characters in Indian Burial Ground appear in The Whistler. So stay with us. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back, and we've got a lot more to talk about with Indigenous authors on the show today. 1-800-996-2848 is the number to join the conversation. The Cowichan tribes won a major land claim victory after one of the longest trials in Canadian history. The ruling is prompting severe backlash from non-Indigenous property owners. The decision could have far-reaching implications. We'll find out more about this historic legal fight on the next Native America Calling.
The Association on American Indian Affairs invites all to Tribal Museums Day, December 6th through December 12th. Tribal museums may offer no-cost or reduced admission, gift shop discounts, art markets, and live cultural demonstrations. Tribal Museums Day honors diverse Native nations as the experts of their own cultures. You can find a map of tribal museums and more at indian-affairs.org/Tribal Museums Day. The association supports this show.
You're listening to Native America Calling. We're talking with Indigenous authors about their new books today. Nick Medina's horror novel, The Whistler, is about the consequences of whistling at night, and Daniel H. Wilson's techno-thriller, Hole in the Sky, is about alien contact on the Cherokee Nation. Are you currently reading a native horror book you can't put down? Tell us about it. We're 1-800-996-2848. You're also welcome to join with a comment or question for our guest today. That number again, 1-800-996-2848, or just 1-800-99-NATIVE. We have Nick Medina on the line right now in Chicago, Illinois. And Nick, a little bit about the plot of The Whistler. Henry, the protagonist, and two of his friends, they are ghost hunters, and they've got a social media channel. And Henry gets very, very involved with the views and the likes and his whole presence on social media as this influencer. Is there a lesson that you're looking to convey or a point you want to make with regard to social media and the impact that it has in our lives?
think the overall point is that, social media basically puts fame within reach for all of us now, and makes it a lot easier than ever before. And, sometimes people think they want it or that they even need it, but they don't realize that it can come with consequences. And, I think we're seeing a lot more of that, especially with studies that are being done. We see a lot of the consequences often um, pertain to mental health and the effects that social media and seeking fame actually has on our health. And I think that's what happens here with Henry. He becomes so obsessed with it. He wants attention. He'll stop at nothing to get it, and it really leads to his downfall. And um, I don't want to give too much away about the book. But he ends up suffering this terrible injury as a result of what's driving him to become, as famous as he possibly can online. And yeah, it's basically a warning story, just like the folklore that I use. Folklore often is meant to serve as a warning, and that was basically the link that I wanted to feature in this book. I always like to pair modern issues, social issues, with native folklore and mythology, and I feel like when they are paired together, they work really well because they can actually intensify each other, and they can also show the relevance, like I was saying before, by coupling native stories, traditional tales with what's going on today. It helps breathe a little more life into them, keeps them relevant. And like I said, on the flip side, having those stories paired with modern issues also shows just how horrific those issues can be.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you also about the whole idea of whistling at night. And in the book, you actually spell out the sound of a whistle. What about in the audiobook? Is there an actual whistle in that? And what are your thoughts with regard to whistling at night? I know some Native communities are talk about that a lot. Others not so much.
Yeah, there is an audiobook and there is a whistle in there. And actually, about 2 weeks ago, I was invited to attend New York Comic Con, where I was on a panel with the audio department from Penguin Random House. And on that panel with me was Sean Taylor Corbett, who did the narration for The Whistler. And he's also done narrations for a number of other Indigenous books, including books by Stephen Graham Jones, who's going to be on the show with us later. So it was a real honor to have Sean narrate this book, and he did the whistle. And I was talking to him about how they did the whistle and how they chose the right sound and the right tones. And he was telling me that they tried out at least a dozen different versions of the whistle, and they settled on one that I think is really creepy. I actually listened to it late at night. I tried to set the scene. I listened to it in the dark at like 2 a.m, and when that whistle struck, it gave me chills all over my body. So they did a really awesome job with it. If anyone's into audiobooks, I would definitely recommend listening to Sean's delivery of The Whistler. But as for me with whistling at night and the superstition, I don't take it super seriously. I think, like I was saying before, I think it's there as a warning, and it's meant to serve as a reminder as well. If you catch yourself whistling at night, you'll probably right away think of this superstition, and that's the whole point. The point is to warn us about the dangers of night. We don't know what's out there. We don't know what might be lurking in the shadows. Therefore, you shouldn't disrupt the peace, and you shouldn't draw extra attention to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Phone number to join the conversation, if you'd like to chime in, 1-800-99-NATIVE. If you are a reader, if you enjoy Native horror books, novels, stories, give us a call. We'd like to hear from you. 1-800-996-2848. Let's hear about another book that fits today's literary theme. Stephen Graham Jones' recent novel, The Buffalo Hunter Hunter, takes readers on a historical journey with a horror twist. He talked with producer Andy Murphy.
Buffalo Hunter Hunter is a Blackfeet vampire trying to get vengeance or retribution or justice against the people who are trying to wipe out the buffalo herds and make us dependent upon the federal government.
Where did this story come from?
Where did it come from? Probably wish fulfillment. I mean, of course, I know what was attempted against the bison herds. I want to go back and get my own vengeance, my own justice, but I don't have a time travel machine. And also, I really can't start a fire without like a blowtorch or something. So I think I would not last long in 1872. But if I were a vampire, maybe I could do some damage. So I think it's just pure wish fulfillment.
Buffalo Hunter Hunter is a horror novel, of course. It includes the Undyne character of Good Stab, but it also brings out the horror of what really happened to the Blackfeet and the buffalo at the time. Can you tell me more about mixing those two versions of horror together in this one book?
Man, it was very little mixing, actually, because American history is a horror story. So I feel like I just had to write history, and it already is a horror story. It was frighteningly easy, but in the current political climate, it feels like there's efforts to pretend like America's footprints have not been bloody getting to where they are. So I think we need people out there on the bookshelves, at the movie theater, on the television screen, in songs, in all art, reminding America of its bloody footprints.
What kind of research did you have to do to be able to tell this story of Good Stab and in that point in history?
Oh, I needed to know the way back history of the Blackfeet. I needed to know the particulars of the Marias Massacre, and I needed to have a really good handle on the language. None of those three things did I have starting out, so I hit up three friends. One of them, Ryan Hall, has written a book, Beneath the Backbone of the World, which is amazing. Goes pretty far back into Blackfeet history. And another friend, Billy Stratton, had a lot of documents pertaining to the Marias Massacre that he forwarded to me. Then a friend on the reservation, Robert Hall, he teaches language and knows the language really well and was able to help me a lot. And I should say also, as far as the language goes, I took my lead from James Welch's Fool's Crow. I use a lot of the same terms he does. I changed one or two, but those hyphenate terms for animals and places and everything that are kind of direct literal translations from the language,
You also wrote two other scary stories that were published this year in August. They were printed together in one book.
Publishers called it a saga double. I kind of call it a flip book. I think in the industry 40 years ago, they used to call it a do-si-do, I've heard. But yeah, it's a double. It's two books published. It's kind of back to back, but one of them is upside down. So you have two covers, and the end of both books is in the middle of the book. And that was really fun. Yeah, Killer on the Road is highway horror, which is probably slasher horror is really my favorite, but this mixes slasher horror with highway, and I love highway horror. And the other one is A Haunted House, The Babysitter Lives, and both of them feature protagonists who are about 18. They're both native, and they're not at all like each other. I tried to make sure that nobody would think they were the same person,
In the acknowledgments of The Babysitter Lives, the haunted house story, you mentioned that the haunted house genre is always changing. Tell me about that and what you have to do as a writer to make sure you're keeping the haunted house story fresh and moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, we've got our canonical haunted house stuff, from Shirley Jackson to Richard Matheson to Stephen King. That's all great. That's wonderful stuff. But we can't always have a group of characters accepting a dare to go spend a night in an old Victorian mansion that's decayed and Gothic and all that. We got to find different ways to do it. So we get stuff like The Grip of It, Grady Hendrix's horror store. It's a haunted house, but the haunted house is an IKEA. Yeah, we're just finding different ways to do it. What's fun about setting haunted houses in different living spaces is that the same conventions and developments express themselves. They're not inviolable, but they're there for a reason because they're super effective. And I really like to see those conventions in different settings and contexts. For the last about 9 years, maybe 10 years, horror has been kind of invited into the big tent at the literary circus. So now that editors and publishers in the market is looking for horror, they're finding that we got a lot of it to be telling. I feel like we spend a lot of time out in the dark, the rest of the audience and the market and the critical establishment assumed that we were just amusing each other with our silly little blood gags. But I'm glad that the world is acknowledging that we're part of the dialogue now.
That was Stephen Graham Jones talking about The Buffalo Hunter. Phone lines are open. Listeners, if you'd like to join the conversation, if you've read any of these books we're talking about on the show today, or you're a fan of any of these writers, you just like native horror stories, give us a call. We'd like to hear from you. 1-800-996-2848. 1-800-996-2848. Daniel H. Wilson joins us now from Portland, Oregon, and his new book is titled Hole in the Sky, a novel. Daniel, thanks again for joining us today. And your writing style is often described as a techno thriller. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, I kind of have two major influences in my life and in my writing. One, I've been in love with science fiction forever. And when my science fiction career didn't work out right away, I studied science instead. So I built robots, for years and ended up, learning a lot about robotics and artificial intelligence. And it gave me the ability to write pretty accurately about that kind of stuff. And the other thing is just, where I grew up in North Tulsa in the Cherokee Nation, and just having, your childhood and just all the people you grew up with and everything just seep into your bones a little bit. So, a lot of what I write has both of those things. It has a lot of indigenous stuff, and it has a lot of science and technology. And so they call it techno thrillers, but lately I've actually heard Hole in the Sky described as techno tradish, which is kind of a mashup, between those two things. And that was something that was really that was intentional, about this novel. So it's been really gratifying to see that acknowledged.
Well, you've written other books. What did you draw from those other stories, those other plot elements that you brought to this new book, Hole in the Sky?
Well, I write a lot about science and technology. And so, like the last novel I wrote before this one was, I worked with Michael Crichton's estate to pitch and write a sequel to the Andromeda strain called The Andromeda Evolution. And so, it's really by the books in terms of lots of science and technology, soldiers, stuff like that. And so, I drew on that, but I really wanted to kind of subvert those expectations. And so what I ended up doing in Hole in the Sky is playing with the idea of indigenous technology. What does it look like to have indigenous technology that has kind of a different goal than Western technology, which tends to be all about exponential growth. And if you're thinking about a plant that's in the environment, kind of a Western approach is to immediately take it out of the environment, break it down into little pieces, figure out how to replicate it, and then plant 1 million of them, and the goal is exponential growth. And so with this, I kind of pulled it toward, hey, indigenous technology is a thing. It's advanced. There's indigenous science fiction. There's all this stuff. And so what does that look like, And it involves really our approach to the unknown, So with that plant, with indigenous technology, you'd leave it there, and you would study all the exponential connections that it has to everything else. And as a result, you might have a lot of unknowns that are out there. But I find that, that the native perspective is more often to live alongside the unknown, to acknowledge that it's there, and not to be driven to destroy it or break it into little pieces and try to understand everything about it, like not whistling at night, you leave it be, And so I ultimately kind of put those two things together through different perspectives of my main characters. I had a scientist character, and I have a soldier character, and I have a native guy who just happens to live where all this stuff is going down. And really, it takes all three of their perspectives in order to survive, what happens out there in Oklahoma.
Well, there's those perspectives, and then there's also the perspective of a female scientist. So there's 4 different perspectives, some native, some non-native, as you mentioned. Tell us more about Michaela and her role.
Sure, yeah. So Michaela is a NASA astrophysicist, and in the novel, she's the one who discovers that there's something happening out at Heliopause. She works on the Voyager program, and those are the spacecraft that we launched in the 70s that have reached the edge of our solar system, and they're at a place called Heliopause.
right now, which if you think of our sun as a fire, this is like where the light dies out, you know. You start getting off into the interstellar medium, the area between stars. And so she discovers what's happening, and she's a character who desperately wants to understand what this anomaly is and what this thing is. And she was actually inspired by an interview I did with a NASA engineer who is deaf. And this woman was describing being lonely at NASA because she's kind of a super nerd and she's not able to communicate easily with the people at NASA. And then in the deaf community, she's not able to talk about super nerdy stuff with those people. And Michaela is like that. So she's young, she's black, she's not what people expect whenever you describe a NASA astrophysicist. And so when she's at NASA, people judge her for not, acting and looking the way they think she should. And when she's not at NASA, the same thing happens. And so she's a character who's kind of had it with humanity, with people in general. And so she's at most risk of sort of dissociating completely and just, giving into figuring out what this thing is. And, really sort of looking into the face of God is what she ends up, is the choice that she ends up having to make.
Hole in the Sky, a novel, and Sterling Harjo has a comment on the cover. He says, Hole in the Sky is mind-bending. Indigenous knowledge collides with science fiction in a thrilling page-turner. More with Daniel H. Wilson on the other side of this break.
Support by the American Indian College Fund. The American Indian College Fund provides millions of dollars of scholarships to thousands of Native students every year. Tribal citizens of every age and experience are eligible. The deadline for applications is May 31st, and you can find everything you need to apply at collegefund.org. That's collegefund.org, or by phone at 800-766-FUND. Education is the answer.
You have it tuned to Native America Calling. We're talking with authors of some of our favorite spooky books today, and there is still plenty of time if you would like to join our conversation. Ask us a question, ask one of the authors a question, or share a comment. We're at 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. We have Daniel H. Wilson on the line. He is the author of Hole in the Sky. And Daniel, I want to ask you about some of the Cherokee elements. Of course, there's views of the galaxies and native technology perspectives, but there's also just a lot of really cool elements of Cherokee culture, contemporary Cherokee culture. And I really like the relationship between the character Jim, who is Cherokee, and he has a young daughter. And there's one point where he's got his hair long and it's in braids, and his daughter, she's kind of got an attitude with him because he's been absent for a lot of her life, and she says to him, Big Indian. She calls him Big Indian. And I shared before the break, my wife is Cherokee, and my late father-in-law, he used to use that same term, Big Indian. There they go, Big Indian. What does that mean exactly when somebody calls another person Big Indian?
I think she's just judging him for trying to put off this image, of being real traditional and just sort of knowing everything. And it's kind of setting it up for the novel where, he's kind of realizing that he doesn't really remember as much as he thought he did, and that really that framework, that sort of way of being and thinking about the unknown is going to be crucial. And so a lot of it is the two of them trying to remember, the stuff that her grandma tried to teach them, and they weren't listening, And so as they get deeper into this, they start to realize that, this all takes place in Spiro, right? The Spiro Mounds. That's where he lives in the Cherokee Nation and on the Arkansas River there, which is the ruins of the mound builder civilization. And so this place is really old. It predates a lot of the tribes that we know today, and they're realizing that what's going on has been here a long time, and that it's rooted in their traditions. And there's some answers for what's happening if they can look back and if they can remember either remember it with their minds or remember it sort of in their bones, and so that's how she starts off describing him. And, by the end, they're really working together to try to get back to that so that they can understand what's happening and survive and be a family again.
Yeah, as a parent myself, that whole relationship is very relatable, very inspiring as well. You mentioned Spiro Mounds, and your family has a deep connection there. Tell us more.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in North Tulsa, but I spent all my summers out on my grandparents' farm, which was our original Indian allotment after forced removal. And so that place was, at the time, I took it totally for granted. I was very bored and I would complain, but me and my brother and I spent a lot of time out on that land. And it was only a couple of miles away from Spiro. And so it's all this, there's just so much that's happened out there, And I remember, visiting Spiro as a kid and realizing that they had laid out the mound builders, they had laid out those mounds in the shape of the Pleiades constellation, the Seven Sisters. And there's some important oral traditions about that, with the Cherokee. But just to realize, like, man, all of this history happened here. All these people lived and died here. And they had this connection to the stars. They were here and they were looking up into the night sky, and they were thinking about a lot of the same things we think about. And so that was really my connection, was to go back home. I walked the mounds. I visited Tahlequah, did lots of fun research on what I consider Cherokee science fiction. and I had this cool opportunity, to put all this into the novel. And have it really organically play out as part of, what would normally be a techno thriller where it's, the guy with the gun saves the day. And we've seen it a million times, so that was a real treat.
I mentioned Sterling Harjo before the break. He has reviewed the book, gives it a big thumbs up. You're working on a screen adaptation with Sterling. Netflix, tell us more.
When I've written a bunch of novels, and a bunch of them have been optioned to become movies, and they kind of never end up happening. And so, this time I was like, all right, I'm doing this whole deal. I'm adapting this. I'm writing it. So when I was cooking on the story, I reached out to Sterling, and we had worked on some other projects together. And, we're both, well, he's from Holdenville, but we're both Tulsa people. And and we started talking about it, and he was excited about exploring this story. So we teamed up, and we sold it to Netflix, and he's attached to direct it. And I'm in the middle of writing the screenplay right now. So it's really interesting to watch this story kind of evolve more. There's a lot more of Sterling's fingerprints on it, as we move it toward his visual idea of what it should be, and mine too. But for this one, I really took it easy on myself, and I wrote the story in a way that it could be adapted without, too much hijinks. And I really wrote it so that it really featured Oklahoma. I really wanted Oklahoma to be visually like a character here. And so, if you read the novel, you might notice that it starts out open and wide and big and on the Great Plains, and as you proceed, it kind of closes in and gets more cerebral and goes more towards, the imagination and dreams and underground. And so that's really intentional, just kind of that visual imagery, because I knew, this is going to be a screenplay. So I need to get out ahead of it.
Well, tell me more about that process, because I hadn't thought of that, but you're absolutely right, how the plot just kind of focuses in specifically underneath that mound. And it is so visual. There are very good descriptions of the Oklahoma landscape in that part of the country. But then there's a lot of gore. There's a lot of characters that come to a harsh demise. So what's that? I mean, how do you translate that all into film eventually?
Yeah, I mean, so what we talked a lot about other films, references, and one thing we both really love is this old movie called Stalker, which is based on a science fiction novel called Roadside Picnic, about aliens that come to Earth and then leave, and they don't care about us at all, but they leave behind essentially a roadside picnic, and we don't understand what any of the technology is. And so it even changes the laws of physics, and it's just, it's just a great reference point for what we're thinking. And the other thing we did was we just shared lots of images of stuff that we, find on the internet. Like, there's a portion of this that involves a black lake, which is pretty spooky. And what we were thinking about there was ferromagnetic fluid. If you look that up and see how that stuff moves, it's just, there's a lot under the surface that is impossible for me really to describe in the novel. But it was really cool to be able to go into the novel having all these visual references that Sterling and I had put together for the pitches, so that we could convey to the studios what it is we were trying to do. And so I had that to work from, which was pretty neat, and it really helpful.
You also draw from some current events in this whole idea of unidentified aerial phenomena. And there was a big story about a year and a half ago or so of some sightings, military footage or radar detected. And I feel as though you kind of drew from that a little bit, especially at the beginning of the book with some of these sightings that the characters have.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, so I randomly had this job, this contract work for the United States Air Force, where I was working as a threat forecaster, which is where they pull in a science fiction author and they team you up with an analyst who has clearances, and they brief you on potentially threatening technologies that are complicated. And then you write a science fiction story that really conveys to the higher up people what the real threat would be. It's more fun to read than a technical paper. And so because of this, I was adjacent to all of these military people and going to these security conferences, because I also had the fun job of trying to teach Air Force cadets how to write science fiction, which was, I mean, that's just funny. You're writing to your parents and you're like, yeah, well, the Air Force is great. I'm learning to write science fiction for my country. But so anyway, I was at this conference, the Aspen Security Conference, and I interacted with a 4-star general who's in charge of NORTHCOM and NORAD. And we had a discussion about unidentified anomalous phenomena. And, the level of seriousness, it just sobered me up real quick. I just realized, like, wow, this is something that the Air Force is actually worried about. They're collecting evidence. There's military evidence. There's civilian evidence. And I started really thinking, what would most people do if first contact happened? If we had to suddenly realize we're not it, there's other life out there in the universe and maybe even visiting our planet. And I feel like that would freak most people out. But I think it's happened before, right? Because people used to believe that everything revolved around Earth, and then we realized, oh, wait, no, we're just a planet around the sun. And then wait, there's billions and trillions of planets and trillions of galaxies. And so, finding our true space, or where we really are at amongst the great unknown, it's something that's happened a lot of times in history. So, I think depending on how we feel about the unknown, that can really predict how we're going to deal with a big kind of change like that if it came about.
Daniel, let's go to the phones. We have Jen, who is listening to the show online in East Texas. She is a regular caller. Hello, Jen. How you doing? You're on the air.
Thank you so much. I have to say that because I can relate to the buffalo horror, I'd be willing to release some of my anger by reading The Buffalo Hunter. And after, reading so much about the horror of the bloody footprints of the first invaders who came with their heavy, rapid-fire artillery, there's no need for me to actually read a scary story, but I can't sleep at night after I read about the history, the authentic history. But I think I'd be willing to take some vengeance reading sort of thing that and then also because I volunteer at the Caddo Mounds Historical Site in East Texas, I can very much relate to Daniel, myself being a Cherokee, as he talks about the mounds in the Cherokee Nation. I've often wondered about what actually happened when the invaders came and during that period, or later on, after they even had not built so many mounds, the invaders began to come. So all this is very intriguing. All of a sudden, I'd rather read somebody else's story than so thank you so much for this program today.
Yeah, Jen, thank you for calling in. And Daniel, I think Jen really touches on something that we haven't really talked about yet, but there's still a lot we don't know about these mounds, isn't there? And they're throughout parts of North America.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's all kinds of ceremony and there's all kinds of knowledge that's been lost. But what I was really sparking to with what Jen was saying is just that, you think about the buffalo hunter kind of going back and getting to rewrite history. This one kind of the Holiness guy jumps forward and reconsiders kind of a different attitude. So if you look at every other alien invasion movie and book, almost all of them, what happens is the aliens show up and they want what we've got. They want to extract our resources. They want to enslave us. They want to take our land, take our water. And, what is that? That's just this fear that, aliens are going to show up and do to us what colonizers have done to indigenous people forever and are still doing. And so that's why I really wanted to tell this story, this alien first contact story, with a native character so we could have a different perspective on that, and have a different expectation for what might be up there, in the cosmos, because I feel like we look up there and we just see the reflection of this civilization, which is built on those bloody footprints. It's built on slavery and genocide and theft and displacement. And so, we don't have to expect that necessarily from every culture. And so, so that was one thing that was really fun, was jump into the future and getting to have a different set of expectations about who might be out there and who might be coming down.
All right. We're going to have to wrap up the show here in just a moment. But Daniel, if you could, I want to ask Nick the same question. But just what do you have going on right now in terms of promotion for the book? And how can listeners keep in touch with you and follow what you're doing?
I'm on Instagram as ContactDHW, and I'm on Blue Sky, and my website's danielhwilson.com. I'm headed out to Bend, Oregon this weekend to speak tomorrow at Roundabout Books, and I'll be at the Portland Book Fest in a couple of weeks. So, yeah, I'm out here in the Northwest doing my thing.
Okay, and Nick Medina, how about you? I'm looking at your website. Looks like you've got some readings coming up.
Yeah, I'm mostly doing things in the Chicago area. I've got some stuff coming up with Barnes & Noble this weekend. I got some stuff coming up in November with Christina Henry when she launches her new book. But you can find me and more about what I'm up to on my website, which is www.nickmedina.net. You can also follow me on Instagram and Threads at Nick Medina Writes.
All right, and with that, we are out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up this conversation today. I would like to thank our three guests who joined us, Nick Medina, Daniel H. Wilson, and Stephen Graham Jones. We will start our week on Monday with a discussion about a historic land claim court decision in British Columbia that could have major implications for all of Canada. Hope you'll tune in. Our executive producer is Art Hughes. Our producers are Andy Murphy, Sol Traverso, and Joe Thompson. Marino Spencer is the engineer. Sho McPolin is the digital producer. Nola Daves Moses is the distribution director. Bob Peterson is the network manager for Native Voice One. Clifton Chadwick is our national underwriting sales director. And Tonia Gonzalez is the anchor for National Native News. Charles Sather is our chief operations officer. The president and CEO of Koahnic Broadcast Corporation is Jacqueline Salee. Have a safe weekend. I'm Sean Spruce.
Keshe, isto man ko hotwea ke tenam awa na kap to bani tikanawa. Yam to da ko mos awa shu up to kwat ko is breast cancer screening there to the mati da panna. Aslat ayu yan kanihan to this healthcare.gov/coverage could awa nan ta isto 1-800-318-2596 up in up to. Look your Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to na pedalito lo kanawe. Ela kwa.
Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiverresources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.